I watched a documentary recently that broke my heart. Not because it shocked me, because it didn't. Thousands and tens of thousands of boys, some as young as 9 or 10 years old, are being raised by an algorithm. And the algorithm is handing them a map on how to live and how to become a man. I've sat across from these men. I know what the room smells like. The question I want to sit with you today is this. What do we do about it? What do we do about it? Not what do we argue? What do we do? Louis Theroux, Inside the Manosphere. It's on Netflix right now, and I watched it and I couldn't look away. Not because it was sensational, but because it was heartbreaking and because I recognized the men in it. I've sat across from them. So, who is this episode for? If you're a father, a coach, a pastor, a mentor, if there are younger men in your orbit and you've watched something shift in them and you couldn't quite name it, this one's for you. We're not here to argue with anyone. We're here to understand this well enough to offer something better. And here's what I believe about all of this. I want I want you to hold it for the next 20 or 25 minutes. This thought. The manosphere is what happens when legitimate masculine hunger finds an illegitimate container. I'll say that again. The manosphere, this extreme reaction to feminism on this side, and it's a broad term. It's not only just that. It could be conflated with any man on a podcast talking about self-help and mental health. It's a broad term. But for those radicalizing the Ken-isms of our society, the manosphere is what happens when legitimate masculine hunger finds an illegitimate container. And the answer is not a better argument, it's a better room. The manosphere, what they get right. Listen, I'm passionate about reaching these men, maybe more than anything else that I do. And which is exactly why I'm not starting with critique. Here's what I won't do today. I won't dismiss this because the men that are drawn into the manosphere, they're not stupid. They're not broken. They're hungry. And hunger, when it goes long enough without being fed, will eat whatever is put in front of it. The crisis underneath this is real. Boys are falling behind educationally in every level. Male loneliness is at its height. Fatherless homes have reshaped an entire generation. The old pathways, a community, a rite of passage, someone to tell you and to show you how to be a man, those have eroded faster than anything replaced them. And into that vacuum walked the algorithm with a map, with bait. So these boys aren't wrong that something broke in our culture. I would propose that they're wrong about what broke it and catastrophically wrong about the remedy. But the hunger is real and ought to be validated. And it deserves to be honored before it's challenged. Because underneath every armored pose, every contemptuous comment, every performance of dominance, and you'll see this on the influencers in the manosphere on TikTok, YouTube, etc. Underneath it all is a boy who got hurt and decided never again. That's not evil. That's survival. That's a nervous system doing exactly what nervous systems do when they haven't been shown another way. And so the Manosphere showed up with an answer. Tens of thousands of boys said yes because nobody else was in the room. So, how did we get here? There's nothing new under the sun. This didn't appear overnight, and it's been building for maybe this particular iteration, maybe for 30 years. We can go back in history and look at chauvinism and misogyny and patriarchy. It's there. But I would say that it seems to get darker with each generation. And it started with men learning how to get women to like them. And these are some of the concepts that I think I heard on Chris Williamson's podcast interviewing Louis Theroux about these different waves. And in it, he mentioned it began with thinking about Neil Strauss and The Game. That was a book that sold millions of copies, teaching men to manufacture attraction through technique, manipulation dressed as self-improvement. And these men were still oriented toward connection desperately, just using catastrophically wrong tools. Think of the movie Hitch, the Will Smith movie. I think it was him and Kevin James, as the sanitized Hollywood version of the same hunger. And it was about a man so afraid, he was so afraid of being himself that he needed a system to be loved. And then it hardened the Manosphere trajectory. It hardened. Hitch was a historical movie. But it stopped being about attraction and became more about domination. Women weren't the prize anymore. They were the enemy. Andrew Tate became the avatar, one of them in the Manosphere. Think about Jordan Belfort in The Wolf of Wall Street, Leo's movie. The man who mistakes acquisition for worth and dominance for strength. Just loud, certain, obnoxious, brazen, hardened, and hollow underneath. Except Belford was at least fictional. Uh, Tate had a live audience of tens of thousands of young men watching in real time. And then I would say that it went darker still. Now, some of these young men have stopped caring about women entirely. It's pure performance for other men, appearance, status, armor. Think Tyler Durden from the Brad Pitt movie Fight Club. Men so alienated from themselves, they'd rather blow up the system than heal within it. Except Tyler Durden, he at least had poetry and a point. But this iteration has cosmetic surgery and a live stream. Each generation perhaps more defended than the last. Each generation further from the actual wound. Each generation lonelier. And here's the through line across perhaps 30 years. Every single iteration is a further retreat from vulnerability. Every stage adds armor. Every generation moves further from the thing that would actually heal them. Louis Theroux, one of the most, empathetic documentary makers around, was the right guy to bring us through and walk through the documentary. He spent months inside this world, and here's what he's observed under it. He said that the confidence wasn't performance. The wealth was often fiction. The romance was manufactured. And this is what he says continuing. And the anger, all that rage was compensation for one thing, the fear of being exposed, of being seen as not enough. So this is not a political problem. That that's not an ideology problem. It's a wound with costume on. So let's talk about the wound. Here's what I've learned about sitting with men in this work. When sadness has nowhere to go, it erupts sideways. It's loud, it's destructive, certain it's righteous. And so the manosphere didn't create the wound. It found men who were already bleeding and then handed them a costume for the pain. Contempt dressed as strength. Isolation dressed as sovereignty. Performance dressed as maturity. Listen, when grief, and these guys are not immune to the emotions of life, even though a lot of them say that women are the most emotional beings. That's not entirely true. We are all emotional beings. It's the language of the heart. And so when grief has no container in a man's life, then when there's nowhere for the pain to land, I call it ManGrief. And ManGrief is a term I learned by one of my coaches, Luke Gifford, maybe close to 10 years ago. So thank you, Luke, for that term. And ManGrief doesn't disappear. It shape shifts into rage, into contempt, into ideology. The manosphere is man grief that never found witness. The manosphere is man grief that never found a witness. And here's what the developmental research says, and my own years in the room with men, and it confirms. And I've been saying this podcast after podcast. You cannot armor your way into maturity. You can't armor your way into maturity. A man can perform alpha for decades and still be running on a frightened boy's engine. The void, it doesn't fill, it just gets louder and louder. Let me show you what I mean. I have been in two very different rooms recently. The first room, a man shaped by the kind of thinking we've been describing, successful by external measures in every way, armored beyond recognition. I won't get hurt again, never again. And what I witnessed in conversations with guys like this is basically hours of unprocessed grief in their lives wearing the costume of ideology, anger at women, contempt dressed as certainty, men that are so defended against their own pain that the defense has become an entire persona. That room and that vibe is concrete, hard, closed, nothing growing organically. And the other room that I participate in is a completely different room. Same demographic, men, but the other room is made up of men that do things that the other men in the first room may never do in their lifetimes. A particular man cave session that we had recently, where one man sat in the chair, told the truth about his life, and the others witnessed it. No fixing, no advice, no armor, just presence. They named their grief, they reflected tenderness back to vulnerability. They let themselves be moved. The room was soil. And in soil, things that are buried don't stay buried, they become gold. Same demographic, completely different map. One room produces contempt, the other produces gold. That's not therapy, that's not weakness, that's men doing the bravest thing that men can do. And so If concrete produces contempt and soil produces gold, what's the soil made of? Not a softer version of the map. I propose a completely different one. The Manosphere tells boys, build higher walls, armor up, dominate or be dominated. The Heartsmith way says, go into the rooms you've been locking. A great song by NF called Mansion. Go ahead and give it a listen. Because the darkness you've been avoiding is exactly where the treasure is. Face the darkness, find the gold. And there's a man who modeled this better than anyone. Not the passive flannel boarded Jesus of Sunday school, not the nationalist warrior king of online religion, the actual man Jesus. He wept publicly, who touched lepers, who raged in the temple and on the pickleball courts. I have a friend that doesn't like the shirt, but I like it. Uh, who sat with women at wells when no self-respecting man of his day would, who looked people in the eye and was glad to be present with them as if no one else mattered in all of the world. The man who died with his arms wide open. This is the fully integrated man, strong enough to be tender, secure enough to be seen, mature enough to receive. That's the map the manosphere never found because it requires going in, not armoring up. Emotion is holy data, not a problem to be solved. The nervous system runs on relationship. It calms through connection, not control, not domination, not performance. Connection. That's the forge. That's where men are actually made in the crucible of relationship. Love never dominates, it always cultivates by Goth. So, what do we actually do? If you're a father, a pastor, a coach, a mentor, here's what I want to leave you with. You don't argue with the algorithm. You don't debate the ideology. You won't win that fight, and you don't need to. You become the room. The younger man in your life who's being handed the wrong map, he doesn't need necessarily a better argument. He needs someone to show up curious instead of critical. He's been put down more times than he can count. To ask him what he's actually hungry for. Because underneath the ideology, underneath all of it, is almost always the same answer. Men who want to be seen, who want to belong, who want to be significant and who matter. Meet him there and then invite him into a different room, not concrete, soil, because that's where things have been buried and start to come to gold. What does it look like if we let our life go ahead and crumble like a seed under the ground, only to find it when it sprouts back up? And so the manosphere is discipling this next generation of men. And the question is whether we are. They're discipling. They sure are. The question is, are we? This week's Heartsmith question. Is there a younger man in your life being shaped by something you haven't yet named? And what would it look like to become the room he hasn't found yet? The forge is open. Men are waiting, and the world needs what gets built in rooms like that. Until next time, shape the heart, forge the man. I'm Jason Twombly. Thanks for being part of this latest episode inside the Manosphere, what they get right and where it's going to die. Until next time.